Dead America, The Fight for Kansas. Part 4, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. The captured truck rode like it was angry about something. Every crack in the road came through the seat like a punch, and the steering pulled hard to the left whenever Atticus let his grip loosen. The headlights were weak, casting just enough light to keep the road visible 20 yards ahead and not much beyond that. He drove with the windows cracked because the cab smelled like sweat and cigarettes and something chemical he couldn't identify. Madison sat in the passenger seat with her rifle between her knees and a folded map on her lap. She hadn't looked at the map in over an hour. She didn't need to. The route east from Ellsworth to Brookville was a straight shot along the highway, and she'd driven it enough times during her solo patrols to know every mile marker and turnoff by memory. In the back seat, Gideon had his katana across his thighs and his head tilted back against the headrest. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. Every time the truck hit a rough patch, his hand moved to the blade instinctively, then settled again. Meat sat beside him, taking up most of the remaining space, his arms folded across his chest and his knees pressed into the back of Madison's seat. He hadn't complained about the legroom, which was unusual. That's how quiet the truck was. Even Meat was keeping it to himself. Nobody was talking. There wasn't much to say that hadn't been said already. The briefing at Ellsworth had been short and direct. The Grand Bend survivors were at a farm east of Brookville. Supply trucks ran the route regularly. The people were being worked under armed guard. That was enough. Atticus kept his eyes on the road. The highway was empty and flat, cutting through open farmland that stretched into nothing on both sides. No lights, no movement. Just Kansas, dark and wide, swallowing the headlights before they reached the shoulder. He watched the tree lines when they appeared, looking for shapes that didn't belong, but there was nothing out here. The zombies thinned the further you got from the population centers. Out here it was just dead land, crops gone wild, fences falling, and the occasional dark shape of a farmhouse sitting back from the road with no lights in the windows and no one left to turn them on. They passed a grain elevator that rose from the fields like a concrete tombstone. Its loading bay doors were open, and the conveyor arm pointed at the sky at an angle that looked broken. Atticus noted it and moved on. Madison shifted in her seat beside him and looked out her window. She didn't say anything about it, but he could feel her tensing up as they got closer to their destination. "How far?" Atticus asked. 10 minutes. He nodded. The truck rattled over a seam in the pavement, and Gideon's hand went to the katana again. "This truck is a war crime," Gideon said from the back seat. His eyes were still closed. "It's what we've got," Atticus said. "I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that if Bennett did nothing else wrong, the suspension on this thing would be enough to convict him." Meat exhaled through his nose. It was almost a laugh. Almost. The highway bent slightly to the south, and Atticus could see the outline of structures ahead. Low shapes against the sky. Rooftops, a water tower, Brookville. Madison sat up straighter. "Slow down before the first intersection. There's a turnoff to the left that bypasses the main drag. We can come in from the north side and keep to the side streets." Atticus eased off the accelerator and found the turn. The side road was gravel, and the truck complained about it, the suspension hammering through every rut. He killed the headlights and drove by the ambient light from the sky, which gave him just enough to keep the tires on the road. The town materialized in pieces: a fence line, a mailbox on a post, a propane tank sitting beside a house. He pulled the truck behind a 2-story farmhouse at the edge of town and cut the engine. The silence that followed was thick and immediate. No sounds, no generators, no voices, no dogs, not even the wind. "Listen," Madison said. They listened. Nothing. "That's what I mean," she said. They climbed out of the truck, and Atticus felt the night air hit his face. It was cool and dry, and it smelled like grass and dirt and absolutely nothing else. No smoke, no rot, no evidence that people had been here recently enough to leave a trace. Meat stretched his back and looked around. "Where is everybody?" "That's what we're about to find out," Atticus said. They moved into town on foot. Madison led. She carried her rifle low and moved through the streets, sweeping every opening for threats without breaking stride. Atticus followed her, with his revolver drawn. Gideon came next with his hand on his blade. Meat brought up the rear, the pipe wrench in his right hand, everyone on edge, ready to throw down at a moment's notice. Brookville was small, A few blocks of houses, a main street with a handful of commercial buildings, a church with a white steeple that caught the faint moonlight. The kind of town that probably had a population sign on the highway, boasting a number in the low hundreds. The first house they passed had its front door standing open, not broken, not forced, just open, like whoever had left had no intention of ever returning. Atticus stepped onto the porch and looked inside. A living room with a couch and a coffee table, magazines on the table, a blanket folded over the arm of the couch, shoes by the door, a jacket on a hook, everything in place, waiting for someone to come home who most likely never would. He stepped back off the porch and moved to the next house. Same thing, door open, furniture intact, personal belongings sitting where they'd been left. A kitchen table with plates and glasses still on it. Not dirty, not stacked with rotting food. Just set there, mid-use, and abandoned. They didn't leave on their own, Madison said. She was standing in the doorway of a third house, looking at a child's bedroom, visible through the hall. A bed with the covers pulled back, a stuffed animal on the pillow. Shoes on the floor that were too small to belong to anyone over 5 years old. They were moved out, Atticus said. All of them. Madison turned away from the doorway. Every house is going to look like this. They came through with trucks and gave people 20 minutes to grab what they could carry. The rest stayed where it was. They checked another block and she was right. Every house the same, doors open, belongings in place, lives stopped in the middle of whatever they'd been doing and relocated somewhere else. A town's worth of people picked up and moved to the farm. The clothes in the closets and the dishes on the shelves and the pictures on the walls all stayed behind, because soldiers didn't care about those things. They cared about hands, bodies that could work. Gideon stood in the middle of the street and turned a slow circle, taking it all in. I've seen bombed-out towns that felt less wrong than this. Meat was standing on the sidewalk in front of a house where someone had left a pair of gardening gloves on the porch railing. He stared at them for a long moment, then looked at Atticus. How many people lived here? Couple hundred before everything, Atticus said. And they're all out at the farm? One can only hope, Atticus replied with a hint of concern. Meat looked at the gloves again, and his jaw tightened. He didn't say anything else. They worked their way through the rest of town methodically. Madison knew the layout and guided them through without wasting time. The commercial buildings on the main street were the same as the houses. A grocery store with nearly bare shelves. The only bit of food left was rotting produce. A hardware store with tools still hanging on the pegboard. A small diner with chairs pushed up to tables and menus stacked by the register. The only things missing were the people. The church was the worst somehow. The pews were undisturbed. Hymnals sat in the racks on the backs of the seats. The pulpit was clean and square at the front of the room. But the fellowship hall in the back had been converted into a processing area. Tables lined up in rows with paperwork scattered across them. Lists, names, ages, physical conditions, skills. Someone had been sorting people like inventory, deciding who was fit for labor and who wasn't. Madison picked up one of the pages and scanned it. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the paper tightened. They sorted them like livestock. She looked at the paper closer, noting that the healthier people had an F beside their name, which she assumed meant farm. The concerning part, however, was the giant X beside some of the elderly names. Atticus looked at the rows of tables and the stacks of paperwork. The scale of it sat heavy in his chest. This wasn't soldiers grabbing people at gunpoint and dragging them to a field. This was organized, systematic. Someone had sat at these tables and decided what each person's life was going to look like from that point forward. "We need to move," he said. They left Brookville the same way they came in. The supply road east was easy to find. Heavy tire tracks from trucks had worn ruts into the gravel, marking a route that had been driven regularly and recently. The road led out of town through more farmland, angling northeast toward whatever was waiting at the end of it. Atticus drove slow with the lights off. The tire ruts were deep enough to follow by feel, the trucks settling into them like rails. The land on both sides of the road was flat and featureless in the dark, but after 2 miles the terrain started to change. Fencing appeared on the right side. New fencing, not the old livestock wire that lined most of the roads out here. This was chain link, tall and straight, with posts set in concrete. "Kill the engine," Madison said. He did. They coasted to a stop and sat in the dark truck, listening. The fencing continued ahead of them, disappearing into the distance. Beyond it, far enough away that they were just shapes and shadows, Atticus could see rows of tents, dozens of them, arranged in tight lines like a military camp. And past the tents, lights. Not electric lights. Portable work lights, the kind mounted on stands, throwing pools of white across what looked like open fields. People were moving in the light, dozens of figures spread across the fields in rows, bent at the waist or on their knees in the dirt, working. Atticus pulled the truck off the road behind a stand of scrub brush that provided enough cover to break up the vehicle's outline. They got out and moved to the edge of the tree line on the foot, crouching low. From here, the operation spread out in front of them. The fenced perimeter enclosed more ground than Atticus had expected. A handful of smaller structures sat near the front gate, with guard positions visible at the corners. The rows of tents were further back, clustered on the far side of the compound beyond the fields. Armed figures walking the fence line in a slow, deliberate pattern that said routine rather than alertness. And beyond the guards, dozens of people working in the fields under those portable lights. Men and women moving through the rows, tending crops in the dark, doing the work that kept Bennett's network fed and supplied. Gideon settled into a crouch beside him and stared at the operation for a long time without speaking. When he finally did, his voice was low and stripped of the usual humor. "That's a lot of people." "Yeah," Atticus said. "It is." Madison had the binoculars up, scanning the perimeter methodically. "I count 8 on the fence line that I can see. Could be more on the far side." Meat crouched on Atticus's other side, his big hands resting on his knees. "So what's the play?" Atticus watched the guards make their circuit along the fence, watched the figures in the fields move through the dirt under the lights, watched the whole ugly machine of it grinding forward in the middle of a Kansas night, and felt something cold and deliberate settle into place behind his ribs. "We take it apart and get our people." Chapter 2. They stayed in the tree line for the better part of an hour watching. The sky had started to change on the eastern horizon. Not light yet, but the deep black thinning to something closer to charcoal, the first suggestion that dawn was coming. It gave them just enough visibility to read the layout of the operation below. The farm was bigger than any of them had guessed. The fenced perimeter ran in a rough rectangle that covered at least 20 acres, maybe more, chain link topped with razor wire, the posts driven deep and spaced evenly, the work of people who'd had time and materials and a plan. Inside the fence, the land was divided into long strips of cultivated field, row after row of crops growing in dark soil. Atticus couldn't tell what they were growing from this distance, but the fields were extensive and well-maintained. Someone was keeping this place productive. The main gate sat at the near end, where the supply road from Brookville came in, a heavy metal gate on rollers wide enough for trucks to pass through. 2 small structures flanked it, one on each side, guard posts or checkpoints. Beyond the gate, a larger building sat back from the road, solid and square, with lights glowing in 2 of the windows. That was the guard quarters. Close to the entrance, close to the vehicles parked in a loose row beside it, 3 trucks and what looked like a smaller utility vehicle. The soldiers wanted to be near their transportation. That told Atticus something about their confidence level. They weren't worried about the prisoners getting to the front gate, but they wanted to be able to move fast if something came from outside. The field stretched east from the gate, taking up the middle of the compound, and at the far end, past the last rows of crops, the tents. Atticus had counted them twice now and kept coming up with the same number, at least 30 arranged in tight rows. Some were standard military canvas. Others looked like they'd been cobbled together from tarps and poles, the kind of improvised shelter that said the operation had outgrown its original setup. The prisoners were back there, separated from the gate and the guards by the full length of the farm. Between the tents and the fields, a few smaller structures were scattered without much pattern. Storage sheds, a water tank on a raised platform, what might have been a field kitchen with a stovepipe sticking up at an angle. The kind of infrastructure that accumulates over time when an operation keeps expanding. Madison had the binoculars and was doing slow sweeps of the perimeter. She'd been at it for 20 minutes, patient and thorough, tracking the guard patrols and timing their routes. Atticus waited for her to finish. She was better at this than he was, and they both knew it. 8 on the fence, she said finally. 4 walking the long sides, 2 on each, 2 more at the front gate. I think there are 2 elevated positions at the far corners, but I can't confirm from this angle. Could be platforms, could be the fence posts, or just taller back there. So 10 to 12, if the corners are manned, Atticus said, plus whoever is inside the guard building. Could be another 6 or 8 in there. Call it 20. That's my guess. For a compound this size, that's not a lot of manpower. They're spread thin. Gideon was lying flat on his stomach beside Atticus, squinting at the farm through the gap in the brush. What about the far side, opposite the gate? Madison swung the binoculars that direction. There's a secondary access point. Looks like a smaller gate, just wide enough for foot traffic. I can see a gap in the fence line where it sits. 1 guard near it, walking a short loop. That's my way in, Gideon said. Atticus looked at him. You want to go in by yourself? No offense to the rest of you, but I can move a lot faster and quieter on my own, Gideon retorted. While wearing white at night? Meat said with a smirk. Without breaking eye contact, Gideon took a knee, picking up clumps of dirt and smearing it over his blood-stained ninja outfit. Within moments, the bright white had faded to a mixture of brown and red. That better, big fella? Gideon asked, prompting Meat to let out a chuckle in return. Atticus shook his head at the exchange, turning his attention back to the fields. There were fewer of them now than when they'd first arrived. The group in the western fields had stopped working and was being walked back toward the tents by 2 armed guards. A new group was emerging from the tent area to replace them, shuffling into the eastern fields where fresh portable lights were being positioned. Shift change. Those boys don't mess around, Meat said. They're running a tight ship with those workers. Around the clock, Madison said. The fields are too big for the number of people they have, so they work them in rotation. Sleep 4 hours, work 8, sleep 4, work 8. That's not sustainable, Atticus said. It's not supposed to be sustainable. It's supposed to produce results right now. Bennett needs food coming out of here, and he needs it fast enough to feed everybody under his control. The planting season isn't as long as he would like, so he has to push. The people are expendable. If they break down, he pulls more from somewhere else. Atticus watched the outgoing shift disappear into the tent rows while the incoming group spread across the eastern field. The incoming workers moved slowly, dragging themselves into position with the heavy mechanical steps of people running on empty. Nobody talked, nobody looked at anyone else. They just found their rows and started working, heads down, hands in the dirt. How long have they been at this? Mead asked. Weeks at least, Madison said. This doesn't look like the first field they've been tending to. Nobody said anything after that. They watched the shift change finish. The workers who'd come off the fields moved toward the tents in a loose column, their shoulders rounded, their steps heavy and slow. The guards walked beside them without urgency. The whole thing had the look of something that had been happening the same way every few hours for weeks. A routine ground down to its bones. One of the guards near the front gate lit a cigarette. The orange glow of it was visible from the tree line, a tiny point of light that moved from his hand to his mouth and back. He leaned against the gatepost and smoked like a man with nowhere to be and nothing to worry about. That was the posture of an operation that had never been challenged. These soldiers had been running this farm since the beginning, and nobody had ever come for them. They weren't expecting anyone to start now. Atticus pulled back from the edge of the tree line and sat against the trunk of a cottonwood. The others gathered in closer, keeping their voices low, even though the compound was a couple 100 yards away. The layout's the problem, Atticus said. Guards at one end, prisoners at the other, and a couple 100 yards of open field full of workers in between. My concern is for the workers, Madison added. When things go loud, they're going to be caught in the middle. That was the problem. The layout put the guards at one end and the prisoners at the other, with the fields and the workers between them. A straight assault through the front gate would push the fight across the entire length of the compound, through rows of crops where unarmed people were on their hands and knees in the dirt. It would be a massacre. We can't just punch through the front and fight our way to the tents, Atticus said. Too many people in between. So we don't fight through the middle, Gideon said. We go around it. Atticus looked at him. I go in through the back gate, Gideon said. Get to the tents, get the prisoners organized, give them whatever weapons I can carry. When you hit the front, they hit the guards from behind. The soldiers are caught in the middle instead of the workers. How many of those handguns did we pack? Atticus asked. 12, Madison said, and enough magazines to make them useful. So our resident ninja gets in, hands them out, and gets people positioned near the fence line on the back side. When we come through the front gate, they push forward and the guards are boxed, Atticus said. I can work with that, Gideon said. Timing has to be tight, Atticus said. If we go too early, you're not in position. Too late, and we run the risk of the guards catching on to what's happening. 20 minutes, Gideon said. That's all I need. One guard at the back gate, then it's just tents and our people. 20 minutes to get through the fence, deal with a guard, and arm a dozen strangers in the dark. Gideon smiled. It was the first one Atticus had seen from him since they left Ellsworth. I spent 6 weeks filming a movie in the jungle where the director made me crawl through mud for 14 hours a day because he wanted the takes to look authentic. 20 minutes in a tent city is a vacation. This isn't a movie, Meat said. No, of course not, Gideon agreed. The pay is worse. The smile faded and his expression settled back into something serious. I can do it. We're going to need something for the workers in the fields, Meat said. When the shooting starts, they're out in the open. They'll drop, Madison said. Get flat in the rows. Crops are tall enough to give some cover if they stay down. The guards aren't going to be shooting at them anyway. Once we hit the gate, every weapon in the compound is going to be pointed at us. Comforting, Meat said. It should be. It means the prisoners are safer the louder we are. Meat turned that over for a second and then nodded. Loud, I can do. Atticus let out a slow breath and looked east. The sky was getting lighter. All right, he said. Gideon, you got 20 minutes before we drive through that front gate. Gideon slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and stood, glancing down at his wrist even though there wasn't a watch. He stared at it for a moment before shaking his head. Don't worry, I have a good internal clock. He moved off through the tree line, circling wide to approach the compound from the back side. Within 30 seconds, the scrub brush swallowed him, and he was gone. Chapter 3. Gideon moved along the outer edge of the fence line, keeping to the scrub brush and staying low. The duffel bag was cinched tight across his back. The katana was in his left hand, blade angled down behind his leg. The compound stretched to his left, the chain link catching faint light from the generators deeper inside. He could hear the hum of them and the distant murmur of voices from the fields, but back here, it was quiet. The guards on the long sides of the perimeter were walking their routes in the other direction, their attention pointed inward toward the workers. Nobody was watching the back corner. The ground under his feet was dry grass and loose gravel, the kind of surface that would announce you if you weren't careful. Gideon picked his steps the way he'd been trained to on a dozen film sets, placing each foot flat and rolling his weight forward instead of striking heel first. He circled wide around the far corner of the perimeter, giving himself distance from the nearest guard tower. From this angle, he could see the full back side of the compound. The tents were close to the fence here, the nearest row maybe 20 yards from the chain link. Beyond them, the field stretched toward the front gate, the portable work lights throwing long shadows across the rows. Figures moved in the light, bent and slow, tending the crops. The guards watching them had their backs to the tent area. The secondary gate was where Madison had described it, a single panel of chain link, narrower than the main entrance, secured from the inside with a chain and padlock. No razor wire across the top. The fence on either side had it, but the gate panel itself was bare, an oversight, or the assumption that the lock was enough. The guard assigned to the back gate was walking a short loop, 20 yards out, 20 yards back, his rifle slung over one shoulder and his flashlight off. He moved with the rhythm of a man who'd done this 1,000 times and stopped paying attention somewhere around the 500th. Each loop brought him within arm's reach of the gate before he turned and walked back toward the corner post. Gideon settled into the brush and waited. He watched the guard complete one loop, then another. He studied the man's footwork, the timing of his turns, where his hands went when he reversed direction. The rifle stayed on the shoulder. The guard never touched it, never adjusted the strap, never moved it to a ready position. It was furniture, something he carried because he was told to, not because he expected to use it. On the third pass, as the guard reached the gate and started to turn, Gideon stepped forward and drove the katana through the gap in the chain link. The blade caught the guard in the side of the neck. He went down fast, his knees folding before he could make a sound. His body slumped against the base of the fence and was still. Gideon pulled the blade free, wiped it on the grass, and studied the gate. The chain link panel was about 6 feet tall. He grabbed the top rail, got one foot on the crossbar, and pulled himself over. He landed on the other side in a low crouch, the duffel bag shifting on his back as he absorbed the drop. He held still for 5 seconds, listening. The generators hummed. The distant voices continued. Nothing changed. He was inside. The tents were ahead of him, arranged in tight rows running parallel to the back fence. Most of them were dark. A few had the faint glow of small lanterns or candles bleeding through the canvas. The air smelled like sweat and dirt, and something thin and starchy being cooked somewhere nearby. People who'd just come off a shift in the fields, eating whatever passed for a meal in this place. Gideon moved between the first row of tents, stepping carefully on the packed dirt paths that connected them. The canvas walls were close enough to touch on both sides. He could hear breathing inside some of them, low conversation in others, the sounds of people too exhausted to do anything but sit and eat and wait for the next shift to start. Someone coughed in one of the tents to his right, a wet, rattling sound that went on too long. Someone else murmured something soft, and the coughing stopped. He stopped at the first tent that had light coming through the flap and pulled the canvas back. 2 people inside. A woman sitting on an overturned crate with her right leg extended straight in front of her, a metal bowl balanced on her knee. A young man sitting cross-legged on a bedroll beside her, eating from his own bowl with his hands. The woman was white, early 30s, with shoulder-length blonde hair and the kind of alert, upright posture that didn't relax even when the rest of her body was worn down. The man was black, early 20s, short and stocky, with a thick neck and broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his shirt. They both looked up when the flap opened. The woman's eyes went wide, and her hand moved to the edge of the crate like she was reaching for something that wasn't there. "Who the hell are you?" she said. The young man set his bowl down and got to his feet in one motion, fast for someone who'd been working fields all day. He looked at Gideon, then at the katana, then at the white outfit. "And why are you dressed as a ninja?" he said. "The name's Gideon, and I'm here to help. So, do you really care how I'm dressed?" Gideon said. The woman studied him for a moment, her jaw tight. "I suppose not, but it's still weird. I promise I'll explain later, but right now, we have work to do," Gideon said. The young man crossed his arms. "I've already done my work for the day, crazy person." "Does the name Madison mean anything to you?" Gideon said. Both of them straightened. The wariness in the woman's face shifted to something sharper, more focused. The young man unfolded his arms and took a step closer. "Very much so," he said. "Madison safe?" the woman asked. "And with some friends of mine, just on the other side of the highway," Gideon said. "What about Connie?" the woman asked. "We're working on finding her, but right now, we need to get ready for my friends," Gideon said. The young man looked at the duffel bag on Gideon's back, then at the katana, then back at Gideon's face. "Well, unless you brought an army, I don't see how you're going to take down everybody." He paused. "Not to call out your ninja abilities or anything." Gideon swung the duffel bag off his shoulder and unzipped it on the ground between them. The handguns inside caught the lantern light, a dozen of them packed in tight with spare magazines tucked along the sides. "I'm guessing that since you know Madison that you're not opposed to fighting," Gideon said. The woman and the young man exchanged a look. Something passed between them that didn't need words. A question asked and answered in a glance. "I'm Piper. This is Zayden," the woman said. Gideon nodded. Piper reached into the bag and pulled out a handgun, turning it over in her hands and checking the slide with a familiarity that said she'd done it plenty of times before. Zayden did the same, racking the slide and testing the weight. "Do you have anybody else here that might be willing to fight?" Gideon asked. "Probably not many," Piper said. "I think I know a few who might be up for it," Zayden said. "Get them and bring them here, but be quiet about it," Gideon said. Zayden moved toward the tent flap, then stopped. "Do I need to worry about the guard?" Gideon pulled the katana partially from where he'd set it against the crate, enough to show the dark stain along the lower edge of the blade. He shook his head and stepped back to let Zayden through. "Hurry, we don't have much time before this kicks off," Gideon said, stepping to the side as Zayden slipped through the flap and was gone. The tent was quiet after he left. The lantern hissed softly on the ground between them, throwing unsteady shadows across the canvas walls. Outside, the compound continued its routine. The generators droned, the distant sound of the work crews carried from the fields, too far away to make out words, but close enough to hear the rhythm of it, movement and labor and nothing else. Piper was still sitting on the crate, the handgun resting on her knee where the bowl had been. Her bad leg was stretched out in front of her, and she made no effort to hide it or explain it. "So seriously, what's up with the ninja outfit?" she said. "I know the apocalypse hits us all differently, but this is a first." "Did you ever see the Ninja Dominator movies?" Gideon said. "I saw a couple. Let me guess, you're a big fan of them?" Gideon chuckled. "Something like that. So what's your story?" "Spent a few years in the sandbox, but it wasn't until Kansas City that I ended up in the infirmary," Piper said. "So you're a soldier?" Gideon said. "I was, at least for a while." "And your fellow soldiers imprisoned you?" Piper's expression hardened. "My fellow soldiers tried to exterminate me. If it wasn't for Connie, I would be long dead. These assholes didn't really care about my past when they threw me in here, not that they asked." Gideon nodded. There was more to that story, and he wanted to hear it, but now wasn't the time. The tent flap pulled back, and Zayden ducked inside, followed by 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all somewhere in their 30s or 40s. They looked like the rest of the prisoners Gideon had seen through the tent rows, thin, dirty, exhausted, and carrying the wary expression of people who'd learned that surprises usually meant something bad. They looked at Gideon and his outfit and his katana, and none of them seemed to know what to make of any of it. "Most people just want to keep their heads down, don't want to get involved," Zayden said. "After what they put us through, I'm kind of surprised half of them can stand, let alone fight," Piper said. Gideon handed out the handguns, one to each of the 3 civilians, along with a spare magazine apiece. They took the weapons with uncertain hands, turning them over the way people handle something they haven't touched in a while. The woman checked the safety and seemed satisfied with what she found. One of the men racked the slide with a practiced motion that didn't match the hesitation on his face. The other man just held the gun and waited to be told what to do with it. "All right, Ninja Boy, what's the plan?" Zayden said. Before Gideon could answer, a sound reached them through the canvas walls of the tent, faint at first, then growing. An engine, coming from the direction of the supply road on the far side of the compound. Then a horn, sharp and loud, cutting through the quiet of the camp. Everyone in the tent went still. Piper pushed herself up from the crate, her left leg taking the weight, while the right one straightened out stiff beside it. Zayden's eyes went to the tent flap. The 3 civilians looked at each other, and then at Gideon, waiting. "Just stay low and follow my lead," Gideon said. He grabbed the katana, pushed through the tent flap, and stepped out into the gray light of early dawn. Across the compound, past the rows of crops and the figures frozen in the fields, the horn sounded again from the direction of the front gate. Voices were rising out there, guards shouting to each other. The compound was waking up fast. Chapter 4. Atticus sat behind the wheel of the captured truck with the engine idling and the headlights off. The supply road stretched ahead of them, straight and flat, leading directly to the front gate of the compound. The gate was visible from here, a dark line across the road, with the guard posts flanking it and the larger building behind. The portable lights in the fields threw a glow above the fence line that lit the sky just enough to see the outlines of everything. Madison was in the passenger seat, her handgun in her lap, watching the compound through the windshield. Meat was in the back of the truck, crouched low behind the cab, where he couldn't be seen from the front. "So, how do you want to play this?" Madison said. "We can drive up and see if they let us in," Atticus said. "And if they don't?" Atticus tapped the handgun on the seat beside him. "Not sure if I'm a fan of that idea," Madison said. A knock came from the back window. Meat's face appeared in the gap between the cab and the truck bed. "This thing is big enough to be a weapon," Meat said. "Yeah, that's true, but how do we convince them to line up in front of us?" Atticus said. "It's got a horn, doesn't it?" Atticus looked at Madison. Madison looked at Atticus. Neither of them had a better idea. Atticus put the truck in gear and let it roll forward. He kept the speed low, easing across the road and onto the supply route that led to the gate. The tire ruts from the regular delivery trucks guided them in. He stopped 15 yards from the gate and let the engine idle. Nothing happened. The gate was closed. The guard posts on either side were dark. No one came out. No one challenged them. The front of the compound sat there in the gray light, quiet and still. "These guys aren't very good at their jobs, are they?" Madison said. "That's probably why they're on a farm detail and not doing something important," Atticus said. Madison checked her gun, racking the slide and settling it back in her grip. "Let's hope you're right." Atticus leaned on the horn, 3 short blasts that cut through the quiet of the compound and echoed off the flat Kansas landscape. For a moment, nothing. Then movement behind the gate. 3 guards appeared from the direction of the guard posts, walking toward the gate from the inside. They moved without urgency, more annoyed than alarmed, like men who'd been woken up early for a delivery that wasn't on the schedule. 2 of them carried rifles loosely at their sides. The third had a pistol holstered on his hip and was rubbing sleep from his eyes. They stopped on the inside of the gate and looked at the truck through the chain link. One of them said something to the others that Atticus couldn't hear. Another one put his hand on the gate like he was about to open it, then hesitated. Atticus scanned the rest of the perimeter. The guards walking the fence line had paused in their routes and were looking toward the gate, but none of them were moving in that direction. They were curious, not concerned. "Maybe they think it's just a regular delivery," Madison said. "How do you want to play it?" Atticus said. Madison looked toward the perimeter, where a couple of the fence guards had turned in their direction. Their posture had changed. They weren't walking their routes anymore. They were standing still, watching the truck, and the way they held their rifles had shifted from carrying to ready. "Floor it," Madison said. Atticus didn't hesitate. He stomped the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward, the engine roaring as the tires bit into the gravel and threw dust behind them. The 15 yards between the truck and the gate disappeared in seconds. The 3 guards on the other side registered what was happening at different speeds. 2 of them dove, one to the left and one to the right, throwing themselves clear of the gate. The third one stood his ground. He raised his rifle and fired a round that punched through the windshield between Atticus and Madison, sending a spiderweb of cracks across the glass. The truck hit the gate at speed. The chain link buckled and tore free of the rollers, the metal screaming as it folded around the front of the truck. The guard who hadn't moved took the full force of the impact. His body went under the wheels with a sound that Atticus felt more than heard, and then the truck was through, skidding on the gravel inside the compound, with the ruined gate dragging beneath the chassis. Everything happened at once. Madison kicked her door open and went right, hitting the ground at a run. The perimeter guards who'd been watching the truck were already bringing their rifles up. She fired on the move, 2 shots that dropped the nearest one before he could get a round off. She kept pushing along the inside of the fence line, moving toward the second guard who was fumbling with his weapon and backpedaling. Atticus went left. The 2 guards who dove clear of the gate were scrambling to their feet in the gravel, trying to get their rifles up and figure out what had just happened at the same time. Atticus came around the front of the truck with his revolver and put the first one down before the man got his weapon level. The second one managed to fire a wild shot that went wide before Atticus closed the distance and dropped him with 2 rounds to the chest. Meat vaulted over the side of the truck bed and hit the ground running. The guard quarters were straight ahead, the solid square building with the lit windows. He covered the distance in a dead sprint, his boots pounding the dirt. The front door of the building opened just as he reached it, a guard stepping out with a rifle in his hands and confusion on his face. Meat hit the door at full speed, driving it into the guard and sending both of them crashing into the building. Inside was a bunk room. Cots lined the walls, gear hung from hooks, and soldiers were everywhere, in various states of waking up. Some were on their feet reaching for weapons. Others were still tangled in blankets trying to figure out what the noise was. Meat didn't give them time to sort it out. He swung the pipe wrench in a wide arc that caught the nearest soldier across the shoulder and sent him spinning into a cot. The room erupted into a brawl. Meat was in the center of it, too close for rifles to be useful, turning the tight space into the kind of fight where his size and the wrench were the only advantages anyone needed. A soldier came at him from the right, and Meat drove the wrench into his ribs. Another tried to circle behind him, and Meat kicked a cot into his legs, dropping him to the floor. A third swung a rifle butt at Meat's head. Meat caught it with his free hand, yanked the soldier forward, and brought the wrench down on his back. The building was full of the sounds of men shouting and furniture breaking, and the heavy crack of the pipe wrench finding targets. The soldiers who could still move started breaking for the back of the building. A door at the rear banged open and bodies poured through it, running into the dawn light without weapons, without gear, just running. Meat let them go. The ones still on the floor weren't getting up. Across the farm, the second front opened. Gideon came through the tent rows at a dead run, the katana in his right hand and the handgun in his left. Piper was beside him, limping fast, her weapon up and scanning the field ahead. Zayden ran on his other side, the big handgun looking small in his thick hands. Behind them came the 3 civilians, spread out and moving through the gaps between tents. They hit the edge of the fields, and Gideon shouted at the workers crouched in the rows, "Get down and stay down." Most of them were already flat. The sound of the truck hitting the gate and the gunfire that followed had sent them dropping into the dirt between the crop rows, hands over their heads, faces pressed into the soil. A few were still standing, frozen and confused, and Gideon shouted at them again as he ran past. They went down. The perimeter guards on the far side of the compound were caught between the chaos at the front gate and the armed group now pushing toward them from the tent area. 2 of them turned to face Gideon's group and opened fire. Rounds snapped through the crop rows, kicking up dirt and shredding leaves. Piper dropped to a knee and returned fire, her shot steady and controlled, despite the bad leg braced at an angle beneath her. One of the guards stumbled and went down. Zayden fired twice and missed, then adjusted and put his 3rd round into the second guard's leg. The man dropped to the ground, and Piper finished him with a shot to the chest. They kept pushing forward through the fields. The crop rows gave them cover, but also blocked their view, forcing them to move in short sprints between the gaps. Gideon could hear the fighting at the front gate, the crack of Atticus's revolver, and the deeper boom of something heavy hitting something solid inside the guard building. A guard appeared at the end of a crop row, 10 yards ahead. He saw the group coming and raised his rifle. One of the civilians, the older man who'd racked the slide like he knew what he was doing, stepped into the gap to return fire. The guard's round caught him square in the chest. The man dropped straight down, his legs folding beneath him, the handgun clattering into the dirt. Gideon closed the distance before the guard could cycle another round. The katana came across in a flat arc that caught the guard at the collarbone and didn't stop until it hit the far side. The man crumpled. Gideon didn't slow down. He stepped over the body and kept moving. Zayden glanced back at the fallen civilian, but didn't stop. There was nothing to do for him. Piper had already moved past, pushing toward the next section of the perimeter. The farm was coming apart around the guards. The soldiers at the front gate were dead or scattered. The ones from the guard building had fled out the back without their weapons. The perimeter guards were being squeezed between Madison pushing from one direction and Gideon's group pushing from the other. A few of them tried to regroup near the water tank in the center of the area, but they were exposed and outnumbered, and the crossfire from both directions cut them down before they could organize. One guard threw his rifle on the ground and put his hands up, then another. A 3rd one broke and ran for the fence, trying to climb it. He got halfway up the chain link before the razor wire stopped him, and he dropped back down, his hands bloody, and sat in the dirt with his arms raised. The gunfire tapered off. Scattered shots became silence. The generators still hummed. The portable lights still threw their white glow across the fields. But the guards were done. Atticus walked through the ruined front gate with his revolver at his side. The truck sat where it had come to rest. The hood crumpled and the gate wreckage tangled under the chassis. Bodies lay in the gravel near the entrance. Smoke or dust or both hung in the air, catching the first real light of dawn as it broke over the eastern horizon. Madison came in from the right side of the perimeter, her weapon still up, sweeping the compound out of habit as she moved. Meat emerged from the guard building, with the pipe wrench over his shoulder and blood on his arms. That wasn't his. Gideon's group came through the fields from the back, stepping over crop rows and around the workers who were still pressed flat in the dirt, afraid to move. The 2 groups met near the entrance. Piper was breathing hard. Her weight shifted off the bad leg. Zayden had the handgun pointed at the ground and his eyes on the guards who'd surrendered. The 2 remaining civilians stayed close together, gripping their weapons and looking at the bodies around them like they couldn't believe what had just happened. Workers were starting to lift their heads from the dirt. Faces appeared above the crop rows, scared and tentative, trying to figure out if it was safe to stand. A few of them looked at Atticus and the team with expressions that were hard to read. Not relief, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. Like they'd been in this place so long, they'd stopped imagining that it could end. Atticus looked around the compound. The guard posts were empty. The perimeter was clear. The guard building was quiet. The only soldiers still conscious were the ones on the ground with their hands up, and they weren't looking at anything except the dirt in front of them. He raised his voice so it carried across the fields. "This farm is ours." The words hung in the still air. Workers stood up in the rows, one by one, dirt falling from their clothes. "If you're one of Bennett's men, I suggest you surrender or start running your ass back to him. If you're one of my people, on me. It's time to get out of here." Chapter 5. The dust was still settling around the front gate when the group pulled together near the wrecked truck. Atticus stood by the crumpled hood, his revolver holstered, scanning the farm as the last of the tension bled out of the air. Workers were standing in the crop rows now, some of them moving toward the tent area, others just standing where they were, like they didn't trust their legs to carry them anywhere. Gideon walked over from the fields with Piper and Zayden behind him. His katana was sheathed across his back, and there was dirt caked into the fabric of his outfit from the chest down. Piper moved with her weight shifted off the bad leg, the handgun still in her grip. Zayden had tucked his weapon into his waistband and was looking around the farm with the expression of someone seeing a familiar place from a new angle. "Looks like you did all right, Gideon," Atticus said. Gideon looked at the wrecked truck, then at the body pinned under the front wheel where the gate had folded. "Subtle as always, Atticus," Gideon said. Piper cleared her throat, pulling their attention. "My apologies," Gideon said. "Allow me to introduce Piper and Zayden." Before Atticus could respond, rapid footsteps pulled everyone's heads around. Madison came running from the direction of the guard building, her rifle bouncing against her back. She hit Piper at nearly full speed, wrapping her arms around the woman and almost knocking her off balance. "Oh, thank God you're okay," Madison said. "Easy there, Madison. We're okay," Piper said. "I'm fine too," Zayden said. Madison pulled back from Piper and smacked Zayden on the arm. "It's good to meet the two of you," Atticus said. He looked past them to the two remaining civilians who'd helped in the assault. They were standing apart from the group, keeping to themselves. The man had his arms folded tight across his chest, staring at the ground. The woman was crying, her shoulders shaking, the handgun she'd been carrying lying in the dirt at her feet where she'd dropped it. "Who are they?" Atticus asked. "People who just want to be left alone," the man said without looking up. The woman wiped her face with the back of her hand and turned away. The two of them walked back through the fields toward where the third civilian, the one who'd taken the round to the chest, was lying in the dirt between the crop rows. Atticus watched them go and didn't say anything. "Is everybody here?" Madison asked. "No, they took a bunch of people to the farmhouse," Piper said. "What farmhouse?" Atticus asked. "It's about a mile down the road," Zayden said. "How many are there?" Atticus asked. "If it's more than two, I hope they're able to walk," Meat said. He pointed at the truck, which was listing to one side with the front end caved in and pieces of the gate jammed underneath the frame. "This thing isn't going anywhere." "Can't you fix it?" Madison asked. "Sure, if I had my shop, a couple of days, and a spare axle. That fence did a number on it," Meat said. "Surely there's got to be a transport around here," Atticus said. "We haven't seen one in a couple of days," Zayden said. Piper straightened up, something crossing her face. "What about the bus?" "What bus?" Atticus asked. "That's a great question, Piper. What bus?" Zayden said. "The one back at the farmhouse," Piper said. "You mean that rusted-out bucket of bolts behind the barn?" Zayden said. "Yeah, that one. I don't think it runs." "But the wheels are intact," Piper said. Atticus looked at Meat, who shrugged. "It's not like we have a lot of options. Let me grab a few things out from the truck here, and we'll head that way," Meat said. "I'm telling you, it's a waste of time," Zayden said. "Well, kid, we have to go there anyway for the others, so it's not going to hurt to try," Meat said. Zayden nodded, the reluctance plain on his face, but the logic harder to argue with. He walked over to Meat, who was already leaning into the open hood of the wrecked truck. "So, "What are we getting from the truck?" Zayden asked. "The battery, spark plugs, cables, anything we might need to get that bus up and running," Meat said. The two of them went to work on the truck, Meat pointing at components and Zayden pulling them free. They made an odd pair. Meat was twice the young man's size, but Zayden had the kind of compact strength that let him wrench parts loose without much trouble. They didn't talk while they worked. Meat just pointed and Zayden pulled, and within a few minutes, they had a pile of salvageable parts stacked on the ground beside the truck. Atticus turned and looked at the fields. The workers were still standing in the rows, most of them watching the group near the gate. A few had started moving toward the tents on their own, but the majority stayed where they were, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Weeks of being told when to eat and when to sleep and when to work had done that to them. "Piper, can you help get these people ready to move?" Atticus said. "I'll stage them by the back exit. There's a walkway that will take us to the farm," Piper said. Atticus nodded, and everyone went to work. Piper moved through the fields and the tent area, speaking to the workers in small groups, her voice low and steady. She didn't rush them. She answered questions when people asked them and gave clear, simple directions when they didn't. The workers responded to her. Some of them seemed to know her from the tents. Others just responded to the authority in her voice, the same way soldiers respond to a ranking officers even when they've never met. Within 15 minutes, she had a column of several dozen people forming near the back gate of the farm, gathered in a rough line along the fence. They were in bad shape. Thin faces and dirty clothes and the slow, careful movements of people running on too little food and too little sleep. Some of them carried small bundles of belongings. Most carried nothing. A few of the older ones needed help walking, supported by younger prisoners on either side. One woman carried a child on her hip, the girl's face pressed into her mother's neck. Meat loaded the salvage truck parts into a canvas bag and slung it over his shoulder. Zayden walked beside him, carrying a second bag of cables and smaller components. The two of them fell in with the column as it started moving through the back gate and onto a dirt path that ran east along the edge of the fields. 20 minutes later, the sun was fully above the horizon, throwing long shadows across the flat Kansas landscape. The column moved along the path in a slow, uneven line, the freed prisoners shuffling forward at whatever pace their bodies allowed. Atticus and Madison walked point, 20 yards ahead of the group, scanning the road and the tree lines on either side. The farmhouse appeared around a bend in the path, a 2-story wooden structure with a wraparound porch, sitting back from the road behind a stand of cottonwood trees. A barn stood behind it, larger than the house, its red paint faded to a dull rust. Atticus raised his fist and the column stopped. He looked back and found Piper. "Piper, keep those people safe here," he said. Piper nodded and started moving the prisoners off the road and into the ditch that ran alongside it, getting them low and out of sight. Atticus and Madison moved forward, staying low along the tree line. Gideon came up close behind them, the katana drawn and held low at his side. They worked their way through the cottonwoods until the farmhouse was 50 yards ahead, the front porch visible through the trees. One soldier sat on the porch in a wooden swing, his rifle leaning against the railing beside him. He was rocking slowly, his boots pushing off the porch boards in a lazy rhythm. Nobody else was visible, no guards at the corners, no patrol walking the property. Just one man on a swing. "Surely they aren't guarding this place with one person," Atticus said. "It's still early, they're probably sleeping," Madison said. "That's my cue," Gideon said. He stood up from the tree line and stepped onto the path. Atticus let him go, knowing they needed a quiet approach, and knowing Gideon was the best tool for it. Madison shifted her rifle to cover him, but kept her finger off the trigger. Gideon walked toward the farmhouse like a man out for a morning stroll. His posture was loose, his stride unhurried. One hand hung at his side, the other was behind his back, a throwing star pressed flat against his palm. The guard noticed him when he was about 30 yards out. The rocking stopped. The man's hand moved to the rifle beside him, but didn't pick it up. He stood from the swing and squinted at Gideon, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A man in a dirty white ninja outfit walking toward him, across a Kansas farm at dawn with a sword on his back. "Good morning," Gideon said. "Man, is it a nice day out here, or what?" The guard raised his rifle but stayed on the porch, the high ground giving him a sense of security that he shouldn't have trusted. "Let me see your hands," the guard said. Relax, friend. I'm just out for a stroll and thought I'd say good morning. If you don't want my hospitality, I'll head on my merry way," Gideon said. The guard glanced down at the porch steps as he moved forward, his attention breaking from Gideon for half a second to check his footing. The throwing star left Gideon's hand in a flat, tight arc. It caught the guard in the throat, and the man's hands went to his neck as he collapsed onto the porch boards. The rifle clattered down the steps. Atticus and Madison moved up fast, covering the front of the house while Gideon went inside. The front door was open. Gideon disappeared through it without a sound, the katana drawn and ready. The farmhouse was quiet. Then it wasn't. Briefly, muffled sounds from inside, short and sharp, and then silence again. A few moments later, Gideon emerged through the front door, wiping the blade on his sleeve. "We're clear," he said. "Where are the people?" Madison asked. Gideon nodded toward the barn. Madison and Atticus crossed the yard to the barn. The doors were held shut with a heavy wooden beam dropped into iron brackets. Atticus lifted the beam and pulled the doors open. Inside, a dozen older people sat or lay on the straw-covered floor. The barn smelled like hay and sweat and the close, stale air of too many people in a space with no ventilation. The people inside blinked at the sudden light, shielding their eyes. Some of them were sitting against the walls. Others were lying on makeshift bedding of blankets and feed sacks. A few looked up with fear. Most looked up with nothing at all, too worn down to react. An older woman pushed herself up from a hay bale near the back of the barn. She had gray hair pulled back from her face and moved with the aid of a wooden cane, her steps slow but deliberate. She walked toward Atticus and Madison with her chin up and her shoulders set, putting herself between them and the people behind her. "These people have done nothing to you. Just let them rest in peace," Ruth said. "We're here to help, ma'am," Atticus said. "Yeah, that's what they've all said," Ruth said. Piper's voice carried from behind them, coming from the direction of the road where the column had been waiting. "Ruth, you're safe," Piper called. Ruth's expression changed. The hard set of her jaw loosened, and she looked past Atticus toward the voice. "Piper, is that you?" Ruth said. Piper came through the barn door, moving as fast as the bad leg would allow. Ruth met her halfway, and the two of them embraced, Ruth's cane pressed between them at an awkward angle. The edge that had been holding Ruth upright dropped away, and she held on to Piper like a woman who'd been holding herself together by force of will and had just been given permission to stop. "Are these people with you?" Ruth asked. "Yeah, they're here to help," Piper said. Ruth pulled back and looked at Atticus with different eyes. The suspicion wasn't gone entirely, but it had been replaced by something closer to cautious acceptance. "My apologies, then," Ruth said. "Nothing to apologize for, ma'am," Atticus said. "Well, be that as it may, I'm going to apologize anyway," Ruth said. Atticus nodded. Before anyone could continue, Meat came through the barn door with the canvas bag of truck parts over his shoulder and grease already on his hands. "I found the bus," Meat said. "How's it looking?" Atticus asked. "It's looking like I'm going to need half an hour if I'm lucky," Meat said. Atticus looked at him for a moment. Half an hour on top of the time they'd already spent. Every minute they stayed was a minute closer to someone in Bennett's network, noticing that the farm had gone silent. He didn't like it, but the people in this barn couldn't walk a mile down the road, and the people from the farm couldn't walk much further than that. "We'll cover you. Just get it done as fast as you can," Atticus said. "I don't want to be here any longer than we need to be." Chapter 6. Meat was on his back underneath the hood of the bus, his upper body swallowed by the engine compartment. The bus was old, a heavy-duty worker transport with faded yellow paint and a cracked windshield. It had been sitting behind the barn on flat ground with weeds growing up through the wheel wells, but the tires were intact and the frame was solid. Everything else was a question mark that Meat had been trying to answer for the last 25 minutes. Zayden sat behind the wheel with his hands on the steering column, waiting. The key was in the ignition. Through the windshield, he could see Meat's legs sticking out from under the raised hood, and every few seconds the bus rocked slightly as Meat yanked or twisted something deep in the engine block. "Oh, come on, get in there," Meat said. More muttered curses drifted out from under the hood. Metal scraped against metal. Something snapped into place with a sound like a socket wrench finding its home. "All right, give it a go," Meat said. Zayden turned the key. The engine coughed once, then twice, then caught and turned over into a rough, uneven idle that shook the steering wheel under his hands. A light cheer went up from the group gathered outside the bus. Not loud, not celebratory, just the sound of tired people hearing something go right for the first time in a while. "Are we good?" Zayden called through the open window. Meat pulled himself out from under the hood and wiped his hands on his pants. His arms were streaked with grease, and his shirt had a long tear across the shoulder where he'd caught it on something sharp. "Yeah, I think so. Let it idle, but if you feel the steering wheel vibrate, you cut the engine," Meat said. "You got it," Zayden said. Meat got to his feet, and Atticus walked over from the barn where he'd been keeping watch on the road. "You're a miracle worker," Atticus said. "Brother, you don't know the half of it, but it's not all unicorns and rainbows," Meat said. "It rarely is these days." "What's the deal?" Atticus said. "The good news is she'll run. The bad news is, if we put it over 30 miles an hour, there's a good chance that engine is going to be in flames on the side of the road," Meat said. "Well, it's a good thing we didn't just pick a fight with a heavily armed group or anything," Atticus said. "We are lucky indeed," Meat said. Both men chuckled, the kind of tired laughter that comes from having no other response to the situation. "How long until we can get on the road?" Atticus asked. "Assuming nothing else happens, we should be good to go by the time you get everybody loaded up," Meat said. Atticus nodded and turned to address the group. The freed prisoners were gathered in a loose cluster between the barn and the bus, some sitting in the grass, others standing with their arms wrapped around themselves, despite the morning warmth. Ruth was among them, leaning on her cane near the front of the group, her gray hair catching the sunlight. Meat climbed onto the bus and sat in the driver's seat, cocking his head and listening to the engine the way a mechanic listens to a heartbeat. "All right, everybody, we're going to take you someplace safe," Atticus said. "I just need you to file into the bus and take your seats." Ruth stepped forward, planting the cane in the dirt in front of her. "Where are you taking us?" Piper stepped up beside Atticus. Her presence seemed to add weight to his words before he even spoke them. "We're going back to Ellsworth. Our people are in control of the town, so we'll be safe there," Atticus said. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Her expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't reassured either. Something closer to a woman who'd heard promises before and had stopped being impressed by them. Despite that, she turned to the group and waved them forward. "Come on, everybody, let's get in," Ruth said. The group moved toward the bus without enthusiasm. They filed up the steps one at a time, some of them needing help from the person behind them. The older ones moved slowest, gripping the handrail and pulling themselves up with effort. The barn people mixed with the farm workers in the aisle, finding seats and settling in with the quiet compliance of people who were used to being told where to go. Ruth walked to Atticus and stopped in front of him. She looked up at him with the kind of directness that didn't leave room for evasion. "I'm going to be in the first seat behind the driver. I'll save you a spot, because we're going to chat on the drive," Ruth said. She said it as if he had no choice in the matter. Then she turned and climbed onto the bus, her cane tapping each step on the way up. Piper spoke after Ruth was aboard. "You should do what she says." "I kinda gathered that about her," Atticus said. Piper chuckled before turning back to help the remaining passengers up the steps. She guided them with a hand on their backs or a word in their ear, steady and patient, giving each one the time they needed without rushing. 10 minutes later, the bus was loaded. Meat sat behind the wheel, with his hands resting easy on the steering column, listening to the engine idle. Madison was in the front seat across the aisle from Ruth, her rifle resting against the wall and her eyes on the road ahead through the windshield. Piper stopped beside her. "Where do you want me?" Piper asked. "Keep watch out the back. I put a rifle back there for you," Madison said. "I'll let you know if there's any trouble," Piper said. She nodded and made her way down the aisle to the rear of the bus, dropping into the back seat and picking up the rifle Madison had left there. She positioned herself sideways so she could watch the road behind them through the rear window. Meat put the bus in gear. "Everybody hang on. It's going to be a little bumpy until we get to the highway." The bus lurched forward and rolled out from behind the barn. The ride was rough on the dirt path, the old suspension doing nothing to smooth out the ruts and holes. The engine chugged at a pitch that sounded like it was working harder than it should have been, but it held. Meat kept the speed low, and his eyes on the gauges, nursing the machine along the path toward the road. The bus was quiet inside. Nobody talked. The passengers sat in their seats and watched the Kansas landscape roll past the windows. flat fields and fence lines, and nothing moving on the horizon. Some of them stared without seeing. Others kept their heads down. Ruth sat in the first seat behind Meat, her cane propped against the seat in front of her. Atticus settled in beside her as they turned onto the highway. The ride smoothed out on the pavement, and Meat brought the speed up to what felt like 25 miles an hour, the engine straining but holding. Once they were moving steady, Ruth spoke. "Piper seems to trust you, Atticus," she said. "That she does," Atticus said. "I suppose you think I should trust you as well." "Trust is earned, Ruth. I hope that Piper's vote of confidence is enough for you to give me a chance to earn your trust," Atticus said. Ruth looked him up and down, taking her time with it, then gave him a nod. "Yeah, I think I can give you that much," she said. "Thank you, that's appreciated," Atticus said. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't heard what I have to say yet," Ruth said. "Fair enough, Ruth. What's on your mind?" "What's your plan?" Ruth asked. "To get you and your people safely back to Ellsworth," Atticus said. "No, that's what you're currently doing. I'm asking what your plan is for these people." Atticus paused. The question was bigger than it sounded, and the way Ruth asked it made clear she already had an opinion about the answer. "If I'm being honest, we're kind of making this up as we go," Atticus said. "That's what I was afraid of," Ruth said. "I think it's worked out pretty well so far." "Oh, it has it? Why don't you walk back there to Julie and tell her that? She's the one bawling her eyes out because her brother is laying dead in a field." Atticus was silent. He glanced back down the aisle toward Julie, her face pressed to the glass, the grief coming off her in waves that the people around her were trying not to look at. "I'll admit, everything hasn't gone perfectly," Atticus said, "which is exactly why you need to take a beat and figure out what your plan is before more innocent people lose their lives," Ruth said. Atticus thought about that for a moment before responding. "Things aren't good here in Kansas, Ruth." "Oh, that's the truth, but that doesn't mean you should come in here half-cocked." He thought for another moment, then nodded. "We've just been playing the hands that we've been dealt. And that's all well and good, but you best figure out what game you're playing before the next hand is dealt, or else you're going to have a lot more Julies on your hand." Atticus glanced back again. Julie hadn't moved. The man beside her hadn't moved. The bus rolled on down the highway, and neither of them looked up. "You know these people?" Atticus said. "Do you have any advice for me?" "Oh, I thought you'd never ask," Ruth said. She patted Atticus on the leg. "Look back there and tell me what you see." Atticus looked down the aisle at the rows of passengers, tired faces and slumped shoulders and hands folded in laps. People who'd been worked to the edge of breaking and then pulled out of it by strangers with guns and a bus that barely ran. "I see a lot of tired, scared people," Atticus said. "What else?" "People who want to be free to live their lives." "Are you asking me or are you telling me?" Ruth said. "A little bit of both. You're right that those people want to be free to live their lives, but what I think you're missing, Atticus, is that their definition of living is very different than yours." Atticus paused, turning that over. "How do you see it then?" he asked. "You come strolling down into our world like you're the hero of this story, and in a way you are. But to a lot of them, you're no different than Bennett." "How so?" "A lot of people back there are lifers, Kansas born and raised. All they've ever wanted was to live their lives in peace, not be told what to do by men aiming guns at them." "We're not aiming guns at them, though," Atticus said. "No, you're not. But you're also not offering them a peaceful life either, now are you?" "Like I said, Ruth, we're doing what we can with the cards in our hand. But you have my word. If I get the chance to play them in a way that I can get Bennett to back off, I will." Ruth looked at Atticus for a long time. The bus swayed gently over a rough patch in the road, and she steadied herself with the cane without breaking eye contact. Then she nodded. "And with that young man, I trust you," she said. Ruth stood up, moving past Atticus into the aisle. She patted him on the shoulder as she passed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go console Julie." Atticus nodded and watched her make her way down the aisle, her cane finding the floor between the seats with each step, her free hand touching the seat backs for balance as the bus rocked beneath her. She reached Julie's row and lowered herself into the seat behind her, leaning forward to speak quietly. Madison slid across the aisle into the seat Ruth had left. "What did she have to say?" Madison asked. "Just enough to make me rethink what we're doing here," Atticus said. "You're here to kill Bennett, right?" If that ends up being the right play, I'll pull the trigger myself, Atticus said. Madison stared at him. For a moment there was something in her eyes that might have been doubt, but it faded as she read the conviction in his face. She nodded. The rest of the ride was quiet. The bus rolled west down the highway at its careful pace, the engine holding together through sheer stubbornness and whatever Meat had done to it behind the barn. The passengers sat in their seats and watched the landscape pass without comment. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows shortened, and the flat Kansas highway stretched ahead of them, with nothing on it but cracked pavement and distance. Atticus sat in his seat and watched the road through the windshield, and thought about what Ruth had said, about Julie's and plans and what kind of life he was offering the people sitting behind him. He didn't have answers for most of it, but he had the conviction, and for now, that would have to be enough. Eventually, Meat straightened in the driver's seat and leaned toward the windshield. The outline of buildings had appeared on the horizon, low shapes rising from the flat ground. Ellsworth. "Attention, everyone. This is your driver, Meat," he said, his voice carrying down the length of the bus. "I'm happy to announce that our next and final stop is on the horizon. We'll be there in 5. Chapter 7. Meat brought the bus through the main road of Ellsworth at a crawl, the engine groaning beneath them like it had one last favor left to give, and this was it. The town looked different in the daylight than it had when they'd taken it. Quieter, more settled. The signs of the battle had been cleaned up, shell casings swept and bodies removed, and the buildings along the main street stood open with civilians moving between them. People who'd been living under Bennett's control a few days ago, now going about whatever routines they'd managed to piece together in the aftermath. Buck came out to meet the bus as it rolled to a stop near the central building. He had his rifle slung across his back and his arms folded, watching the vehicle with the cautious appraisal of a man who didn't trust anything he hadn't personally cleared. Chucky and Rocky were behind him, positioned on either side of the building entrance with their weapons visible. They held their spots while Buck moved forward alone. He relaxed when Meat opened the door and stepped down, followed by Atticus. The passengers started filing out behind them, slow and uncertain, stepping down from the bus and blinking in the sunlight. The Ellsworth civilians who'd been going about their routines stopped to watch. Nobody said anything. The freed workers stood in a loose cluster on the street, holding their small bundles and waiting to be told where to go next. Some of them recognized the buildings. A few of them recognized the street. They looked at the town the way you'd look at a place you used to live after someone else had been living in it. Diane came out of one of the buildings across the street, Max a step behind her. They'd been watching from the windows, and the sight of familiar faces on the bus had pulled them outside. Max's face changed when he spotted Piper and Zayden in the group. "Piper, Zayden," Max said. "Are you two okay?" "Yeah, we're okay, Max. What about you?" Piper said. "Yeah, man, how the hell did you get away?" Zayden said. Max's expression shifted. The relief at seeing them drained into something else, something that sat between shame and embarrassment. He looked at the ground. "I hid in the closet," Max said. Piper and Zayden didn't react. Whatever they thought about that answer stayed behind their faces, controlled and unexpressed. Atticus stepped up beside Max. "Don't be too harsh on him. If it wasn't for Max, we never would have been able to find Madison, let alone the rest of you," Atticus said. Piper and Zayden nodded, both of them reaching out to pat Max on the shoulder. The tension in Max's posture loosened, and he let out a breath he'd been holding since they'd pulled into town. Buck walked over from where he'd been watching the passengers unload. "Did you have any trouble up there?" "Nothing we couldn't handle," Atticus said. "You can handle anything as long as you have the Ninja Dominator on your team," Gideon said. A few chuckles went through the group, the kind of short, tired laughter that breaks tension without really replacing it with anything lighter. The laughter fell quiet when Ruth came down the bus steps, her cane finding the pavement with a sharp tap. She stood at the bottom and turned back to the passengers still on the bus, waving them out with the calm authority of a woman who'd been managing groups of people her entire life. They came when she waved. Nobody hesitated. "Atticus, a word," Ruth said. Atticus walked over to her, with Buck beside him. "Ruth, this is Buck," Atticus said. "It's a pleasure, ma'am," Buck said. "He's got this town on lockdown, making sure everyone is safe," Atticus said. Ruth looked Buck over, the way she'd looked Atticus over on the bus, measuring, deciding. You look capable enough, she said. I'll take that as a compliment, Buck said. I assume you know which houses are suitable for some new residents, Ruth said. Yes, ma'am. I think we can arrange that, Buck said. Some of these folks lived here, so they'll let you know where they're going to go. But if you can find a spot for the rest of them, I sure would appreciate it, Ruth said. I'll take care of it personally, Buck said. He nodded and walked off toward the group of passengers, already scanning the buildings along the street and working out the logistics in his head. Ruth followed behind him, her cane tapping the pavement in a steady rhythm, intercepting passengers and directing them with quiet words and pointed gestures. Within minutes, she had people sorting themselves into groups, the Ellsworth residents heading for their old homes and the others waiting for Buck to assign them somewhere. The two of them worked together like they'd been doing it for years. Buck handled the buildings and Ruth handled the people, and between them, the chaos of a busload of displaced survivors turned into something that almost resembled organization. Diane had moved into the group as well, working alongside Ruth without needing to be told. She knew the faces from Grand Bend, and she went to each one, speaking quietly, touching arms and shoulders, doing the work of reconnection that couldn't be rushed. Madison walked over to Atticus, the two of them standing apart from the activity and watching everyone get settled. Well, it's certainly a start, Madison said. Yeah, but what do we do now? We're not exactly in a position to take on Bennett, especially since he's going to be on the warpath. And we still don't have a lead on Connie, Atticus said. Let's go check in with Ingrid, see what she's hearing on the radio, Madison said. Atticus took one last look at the passengers being sorted into groups on the street. Ruth had already gotten the first group moving toward a row of houses on the east side of town, her cane setting the pace, while Buck walked ahead to check the doors. They crossed the street to a low brick building 2 doors down from the central headquarters. The front room had been converted into a supply storage area, crates and boxes stacked along the walls. The building had been part of Bennett's logistics chain before they'd taken the town, and the supplies inside were a mix of food, ammunition, and field equipment that the soldiers had been stockpiling for distribution to the other outposts. Atticus and Madison walked through it to the back room, where Ingrid had set up the radio equipment on a heavy wooden desk pushed against the wall. Cables ran from the desk to an antenna that had been threaded through a gap in the window frame. Ingrid was sitting in front of the equipment with a pair of headphones around her neck and a notepad covered in shorthand. Knock, knock, Atticus said. Hey, Atticus, welcome back, Ingrid said. How are things looking on the radio? Madison asked. Pretty normal so far. Whatever you did in Brookville hasn't raised any flags yet, Ingrid said. It's only a matter of time, Atticus said. I know, and I'm going to keep listening for it so we're ready, Ingrid said. Has there been anything else? Madison asked. Ingrid thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing as something came back to her. Sort of. I found a weird signal about an hour ago. She turned to the radio and adjusted the dials, scrolling through frequencies until the speaker crackled and a sound came through. A digital voice, flat and mechanical, the kind of computer-generated speech that stripped every word of inflection. It was reading numbers. Okay, yeah, here it is. There's a beep that I assume is the end and beginning of the message, Ingrid said. A short beep came through the speaker, followed by the digital voice. 13, 1, 4, 9, 19, 15, 14. Another beep. Then the sequence started again. 13, 1, 4, 9, 19, 15, 14. The same numbers, the same flat delivery, looping. I don't know what to make of it, but it's certainly not normal, Ingrid said. Madison's face changed. The calm, measured expression she'd been wearing since they had arrived in Ellsworth fell away, and something closer to alarm took its place. She moved toward the radio, nearly pushing Ingrid out of the way to get to the controls. What is it? What's wrong? Atticus said. It's Cook, Madison said. As in, your mole Cook? Atticus said. Yeah, and something's wrong. He shouldn't be reaching out like this, Madison said. How the hell do you know it's him? It's just numbers, Ingrid said. Madison was already adjusting frequencies as she talked, her hands moving across the dials, flicking switches like it was second nature. The numbers spell out my name. The 13th letter is M, 1 is A, and so on, Madison said. That's a pretty weak-ass code, Ingrid said. Only if you know what you're looking for. It's basically a dead drop over the airwaves, Madison said. She finished changing frequencies, leaned forward, and clicked the talk button. The speaker hissed with static. "I'm online," Madison said. The room went still. Atticus stood behind her with his arms at his sides. Ingrid sat frozen in her chair. The static hissed from the speaker, empty and formless. And the seconds stretched. 5 seconds. 10. The hiss of dead air filled the small room and pressed against the walls. Atticus watched Madison's hand on the talk button, her knuckles white from the grip. Ingrid's eyes moved between Madison and the radio, waiting for something to happen and not sure she wanted it to. Then a voice came through, male, tight, speaking fast. "I can't stay on here long, so listen up. Connie is alive, but she's not in Burlington. She's in the high school in McPherson. Bennett also knows what has happened in Ellsworth, and he's assembling a strike team, and they're going to be on the road within the hour coming out of Burlington. So, whatever you're going to do, you better do it quick." "How many are they sending?" Madison asked. "Enough to cause you problems unless you're ready for them," Cook said. Voices in the background, distant but getting closer. The sound of people moving on the other end of the line. Then the signal cut out. The speaker went back to static, flat and dead. Madison stared at the radio. Her hand was still on the talk button. She clicked it twice more, quick bursts, trying to pull the signal back. Nothing. The static filled the room like white noise, covering the silence that none of them wanted to sit in. "Did they cut him off?" Ingrid asked. "I don't know. Regardless, there's nothing we can do about it from here," Madison said. She let go of the talk button and sat back. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes stayed on the radio for another moment before she turned away from it. "What's McPherson?" Ingrid asked. "It's Bennett's high-security prison. If Connie's there, then he has bad intentions for her," Madison said. "We better go get her then," Atticus said. "What about the assault team headed our way?" Ingrid said. Atticus and Madison looked at each other, the same calculation running through both of them at the same time. A strike force on the road from Burlington, Connie locked in a prison in McPherson, and a town full of freed prisoners who couldn't defend themselves. 3 problems, not enough people to handle all of them at once. "I have an idea, but it's not a good one," Madison said. "It's better than what I've got. Let's assemble the team. We don't have time to waste." Chapter 8. They gathered in the front room of the radio building, the 7 of them standing between the stacked supply crates and the boarded windows. Atticus had pulled the door shut behind them. The street noise from outside, the shuffling of passengers, and the low murmur of people finding their housing was muffled, but still present, a reminder of what they were trying to protect. Atticus stood near the center of the room. Madison leaned against the wall beside the door to the back room, where Ingrid was still monitoring the radio. Meat had his arms folded and his back against a stack of crates. Buck stood opposite him, with his thumbs hooked into his belt. Gideon was near the window, his katana propped against the wall beside him. Piper had found a chair and was sitting with her bad leg extended, the handgun resting on her thigh. Zayden stood beside her, his hands in his pockets. Everyone else was at their posts, Chucky and Rocky on the perimeter, Ingrid on the radio, Max and Diane with the civilians. This was the group that would decide what happened next, and every one of them knew it. The room smelled like gun oil and cardboard from the supply crates, and the light coming through the gaps in the boards threw thin lines across the floor. "All right, here's the situation. Bennett knows what we're up to, and there's a strike team headed our way," Atticus said. "How many, and when do we expect them?" Buck asked. "Don't know how many, but they'll be here within the hour," Madison said. "We have a few extra hands, so we should be able to hold our own," Buck said. "About that, you're not going to have as many hands as you think," Atticus said. "Why not?" Buck said. "Because we know that Connie is at the prison in McPherson, and since Bennett knows what we're up to, there's a good chance he's going to move her. Or worse," Madison said. "Which means we need to go get her now, while we have the chance," Atticus said. Buck's jaw worked for a moment as he processed that. He looked around the room, doing the same math everyone else was doing. Splitting their already thin force in the face of an incoming strike team wasn't exactly ideal. "Okay, who are you taking?" Buck asked. Atticus glanced at Madison. She gave him a small nod. "Both of us, and Gideon," Atticus said. "I'm going too," Piper said. "They could really use your gun for the strike team," Atticus said. And if you plan on breaking into McPherson and expecting to get back out in one piece, you're going to need my gun," Piper said. Atticus looked at Madison again. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "She's right," Madison said. "Okay, it's the four of us," Atticus said. "I might need to pull from the newcomers, but we should be able to get a proper defense here," Buck said. "There is another option," Madison said. "Well, lay it on me," Buck said. Madison walked over to a map pinned to the wall behind the supply crates. It was a road map of central Kansas, the kind you'd find at a gas station, with hand-drawn markings and notes in pencil from the soldiers who'd been using it before the team had taken the town. Supply routes, patrol schedules, and grid references were scrawled in the margins. Madison ignored all of it and pointed to the highway that connected Ellsworth to Burlington. "If the strike team is coming from Burlington, they're going to be on this road. It's the only direct route," she said. Buck and the others gathered around the map. Madison traced a line with her finger south from the highway to a point where a secondary road branched off. Her finger stopped on a small town marked at the end of that road. "There's a little town called Lindsborg straight down this road off the main highway. I know for a fact that it's been cleared out by Bennett and his men," Madison said. "So you think we set up an ambush there, huh?" Buck said. "That's the general idea. However, you won't be alone there," Madison said. Buck's expression shifted. "I thought you just said it was cleared out." "Of civilians, Bennett moved in new residents, undead ones," Madison said. A ripple of confusion went through the group. Zayden and Piper exchanged a look. Meat unfolded his arms. Even Gideon turned from the window. "Why in the world would anybody do that?" Buck said. "I'm sure he has his reasons. It could be that he didn't have the manpower to hold it, and he got creative in order to keep everybody out," Madison said. "Or he wants a training ground for new recruits. Regardless of the reason, you're going to have company," Atticus said. Buck stared at the map for a long moment, his eyes tracing the road from the highway into Lindsborg and back. He looked at the distance between the turnoff and the town, and then at the distance between the turnoff and Ellsworth. His finger tapped the intersection where the secondary road met the highway. "I think we can use it to our advantage," Buck said. He turned to Meat. "I want you to go get Sasha. Tell her to bring a few rifles because we're going on a hunt," Buck said. "I'll go with you too," Zayden said. Buck stared at Zayden for a moment, sizing him up the way he sized up everyone. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. He nodded. "You look like you can handle your own, plus having a local can't hurt," Buck said. He held up a finger, making the point clear. "But you follow my orders. Is that clear?" Buck said. Zayden glanced at Madison, who gave him a nod. "Whatever you say, I'll do," Zayden said. "Good enough for me," Buck said. "Buck, we have to get on the road. Will you handle the town defenses too before heading out?" Atticus said. "Chucky and Rocky are already in position. I'll have Max go around and pull who we can," Buck said. "Talk to Ruth. She might have a few people in mind who can help," Atticus said. Buck nodded and extended his fist. Atticus met it with a bump, a brief gesture between two men who understood that the next time they saw each other might not be guaranteed. Buck left through the front door, Meat and Zayden behind him. Meat clapped Atticus on the shoulder as he passed, a gesture that carried more weight than any words would have. Zayden nodded to Piper, who nodded back. Then the door closed and the room was quieter with 3 fewer bodies in it. The 4 of them stood in the silence for a moment. Atticus looked at Madison, then at Gideon, then at Piper. This was the McPherson team. 2 people he'd trust with his life, and one he'd met a few hours ago who'd already proven herself. It would have to be enough. Atticus turned to the supply crates along the wall. The soldiers had left behind a decent stock of ammunition when the town fell, sorted by caliber and stacked in metal boxes. Atticus found the rounds that fit his revolver and loaded his pockets. Madison selected magazines for her rifle and her sidearm, checking each one before tucking them into her vest. Piper did the same, moving through the ammunition with the efficient hands of someone who'd done it 1,000 times in places that mattered more than a supply room in Kansas. She tested the weight of each loaded magazine before seating it, a habit that spoke to muscle memory from the sandbox. Gideon stood apart from the ammunition. He didn't reach for a gun. He checked the edge of his katana with his thumb, adjusted the strap on the sheath across his back, and patted the pouch on his belt where he kept the throwing stars. That was his resupply. "Do I want to know how bad McPherson is?" Atticus asked. Probably not, Madison said. Atticus laughed, a short sound that didn't have much humor behind it. They finished loading up in silence. Once armed, the four of them walked out of the building and into the sunlight. The street was calmer now. Most of the passengers from the bus had been sorted into housing. A few lingered near the central building, talking quietly or just sitting in the shade. Ruth was visible down the block, standing on the porch of a house with her cane, directing someone inside. An SUV was parked near the radio building, one of the vehicles they'd captured from Bennett's soldiers. Atticus climbed behind the wheel. Madison took the passenger seat. Gideon and Piper got in the back, Gideon setting his blade between his knees and Piper adjusting her bad leg into a position that would hold for a drive. It's a little bit of a detour, but we need to head north out of here first. Less chance of running into the strike team, Madison said. A little detour never hurt anybody, Atticus said. He started the engine and pulled out onto the main road, heading north. The town passed by the windows on both sides, houses with open doors and people moving inside them. A woman hanging laundry on a line between two porch posts. Doing something normal, because normal was what people needed. A man sitting on a front step with his face in his hands. The ordinary and the broken, side by side on the same street. In the rearview mirror, Ellsworth grew smaller behind them. The buildings shrank to shapes, and the shapes shrank to a line on the horizon. And then there was nothing but the flat Kansas road, stretching in both directions. Somewhere to the south, a strike force was moving toward the town they'd just left. Somewhere to the east, Connie was locked in a prison that Madison didn't want to describe. And somewhere in between, Buck and his team were about to walk into a ghost town full of the dead. Atticus kept his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel and tried not to think about how thin they'd spread themselves. Chapter 9. Buck drove the SUV south off the highway and onto the secondary road that led to Lindsborg. The road was 2 lanes of cracked asphalt running between open fields, straight and flat, with no cover on either side. He stopped a quarter mile out from the edge of town and left the engine running. It was just after noon. The sun was high and the sky was cloudless, and the town sat ahead of them in the heat like something out of a photograph. Small place. A grid of residential streets feeding into a compact downtown area of 2- and 3-story buildings clustered along a main drag. Church steeple rising above the roof lines. Water tower at the north end, with the town name painted on it in faded blue letters. From this distance, it looked like any other small Kansas town that had been sitting empty since the world changed. "It don't look that dangerous," Buck said. "Yeah, but I can smell it from here," Meat said. He was right. Even with the windows cracked, the smell was reaching them. The thick, sour stench of decay that anyone who'd spent time around the dead learned to recognize. It came on the breeze in waves, stronger when the wind shifted, and it was coming from everywhere at once, not a single source. The whole town. "How do you want to play it, Buck?" Sasha asked from the back seat. "We're going to do a drive-through, then you're going to get back up to the highway," Buck said. Sasha nodded. Buck put the SUV in gear and rolled forward. They entered Lindsborg on the main residential street. The houses on both sides were closed up tight. Doors shut. Windows shut. Curtains drawn or blinds pulled. The kind of sealed-up look that said someone had gone through and locked everything down on purpose. But behind those closed doors and sealed windows, there was movement. Shadows passing behind curtains. Shapes pressing against glass. The faint sound of hands and fists thumping against wood from inside. The houses weren't empty. They were full. As they got closer to downtown, the situation outside the houses changed. Zombies stood in the front yards, chained to fence posts and porch railings and mailbox poles. Heavy chains, the kind used for towing, wrapped around their torsos or necks and bolted to whatever was sturdy enough to hold them. The creatures lunged and strained against the chains as the SUV passed, their arms reaching and their jaws working. They couldn't get more than a few feet from their posts. Guard dogs. That's what they were. Dead things on leashes, positioned to keep anyone from approaching the houses or lingering on the street. Zayden stared out the window at a zombie chained to a light pole in someone's front yard. The creature was wearing the remains of a flannel shirt and jeans, and it threw itself against the chain with a mindless repetition that said it had been doing the same thing for weeks. Jesus, these assholes need a hobby, Zayden said. What kid? You don't like collecting zombies? Buck said. I'm kinda partial to football and post-game partying with cheerleaders, but that's just me, Zayden said. I like this kid, Meat said. Buck laughed as he turned onto the main drag. Downtown Lindsborg was 2 blocks of storefronts, a hardware store, and a diner, and a small grocery, and the other businesses that kept a town this size running, all of them locked up, and all of them occupied. The creatures inside were visible through the windows, pressing against the glass, their faces and hands smearing against the panes. Dozens of them packed into the storefronts like merchandise. Some of the windows had cracks spreading from the pressure of bodies pushing against them from inside. It was clear that the glass wouldn't hold forever, but for the moment, it was standing firm. The smell was worse here. The concentrated stench of dead things locked in enclosed spaces in the Kansas heat. Meat pulled his shirt up over his nose. Zayden did the same. Buck just breathed through his mouth and kept driving. He stopped a couple of blocks past the main intersection, pulling the SUV to the curb. Across the street, a gas station sat on the corner with a mechanic shop attached to the side. The gas pumps were dark and the convenience store windows were boarded over. The shop had 3 bay doors facing the street. 2 of them were pulled down and latched. The third was partially open, raised about 2 feet off the ground, and in the gap between the door and the concrete floor, shapes moved in the darkness inside. Creatures shuffling back and forth, too slow or too stupid to figure out that 2 feet of clearance was enough to crawl through. There it is, Buck said. What am I looking at? Sasha said. Where you're driving to. We're going to clear that building out and open that bay door for you. Once you get those assholes' attention, you hightail it there and lock it up tight, Buck said. Where are you going to be? Sasha said. We're going to be up the street. As soon as their backs are to us, we're going to open up on them, Buck said. I think I can handle that, Sasha said. Once you're inside, you stay low and let us handle things, at least until their focus is off of you, Buck said. And after that, Sasha said. Buck smirked. Remind them of how impolite it is to follow a nice young lady home without an invitation. Sasha shook her head, but there was a grin behind it. Buck motioned for everyone else to get out. Meat and Zayden climbed out of the back, and Sasha slid across the console into the driver's seat. She adjusted the mirrors and settled the rifle into the passenger seat. You got your radio? Sasha asked. Buck held up a short-range walkie-talkie. Let me know when you're on the way. If I do my job, you'll probably be able to hear the gunfire, but I'll give you a heads up, Sasha said. Buck nodded, and Sasha pulled away from the curb, swinging the SUV around and heading back up the main drag toward the highway. The sound of the engine faded as she drove out of town, and then it was just the 3 of them standing on the sidewalk in a town full of the dead. The chained zombies on the nearest posts strained toward them, the chains going taut and the creatures' feet scraping against the dirt as they pulled. The ones inside the storefronts thumped against the glass, drawn by the movement and the sound. The whole town seemed to shift and groan around them, a low background noise of dead things reacting to the presence of the living. Zayden, start scouting out some ambush points for us. Meat and I are going to handle the garage, Buck said. I already have some stuff in mind, Zayden said. He nodded and took off at a jog up the street, staying to the center of the road and giving the chained creatures on the sidewalks a wide berth. He moved well for a stocky kid, light on his feet and aware of his surroundings, his head turning as he cataloged the buildings and alleys and positions on either side. Buck and Meat crossed the street to the mechanic's shop. The partially open bay door was directly ahead of them. The shapes inside had noticed the movement and were pressing closer to the gap, gray hands reaching under the door and scraping against the concrete. I'll get the door, Buck said. And I'll greet the locals, Meat said. He shifted the pipe wrench to his lead hand and set his feet. Buck stepped to the side of the bay door, grabbed the handle, and shoved it up in one hard motion. The door rattled up on its tracks and daylight flooded the shop floor. 6 zombies stood inside, blinking against the sudden brightness. They were packed between a hydraulic lift and a row of tool cabinets, their clothes stained and their skin the color of old leather. The nearest one lurched forward before its eyes had adjusted, reaching blindly. Meat stepped into the doorway and brought the pipe wrench across in a flat arc that caught the creature in the temple. It dropped sideways into the tool cabinet and didn't get up. The rest came at once. Meat met them head on, the pipe wrench swinging in controlled arcs that used the tight space to his advantage. Each swing had purpose behind it. A creature reached for his arm, and he drove the wrench down onto its skull. Another stumbled over the first one's body, and Meat kicked it back into the lift, before finishing it with a downward strike. Buck came in from the side with his machete, taking the head off one that was trying to circle behind Meat, and then driving the blade into the forehead of another that had gotten tangled in an air hose coiled on the floor. The last one came from behind the lift. It was faster than the others, still carrying enough muscle mass to move with something close to purpose. Meat sidestepped its lunge and brought the wrench across the back of its head. The creature went down face first onto the concrete and stayed there. The shop was quiet. 6 bodies on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of them, concentrated by the enclosed space and the heat. "I'll see if there's anything useful in here. You check the waiting room," Buck said. Meat walked through the doorway into the waiting room. 2 plastic chairs sat against the wall beside a vending machine with a cracked front panel. A counter separated the waiting area from the small parts store behind it. 2 more zombies were in the room. One was sitting in a chair, which would have been almost funny if it hadn't stood up the moment Meat walked in. The other was behind the counter, pawing at the locked display case like it was trying to remember what shopping was. Meat put them both down with quick, efficient strikes. The one in the chair went first, the wrench caving in the side of its skull before it got fully upright. The one behind the counter tried to climb over and Meat caught it mid-roll, driving the wrench into the top of its head. He checked the store area beyond the counter. Empty, locked down. No creatures, no supplies, nothing worth taking. He walked back to the shop floor. "We're clear. You find anything?" Meat said. "The bastards cleared it out of anything useful," Buck said. He was standing in the middle of the shop floor, looking at the empty tool cabinets and the bare shelves along the walls. Whatever had been in here before Bennett's people had set up their zombie collection, they'd stripped it first. No tools, no parts, no oil or fluid. Just an empty shop with dead things in it. The walkie-talkie on Buck's belt crackled to life. "Hey, Buck, I'm in position," Sasha said. "Copy that, Sasha," Buck said. Up at the highway intersection, Sasha had positioned the SUV so that the driver's window faced east, toward Burlington. The rifle rested on the window frame, the barrel pointed down the highway. From here, she could see a mile or more of flat, straight road. Anyone coming from Burlington would be visible long before they got close. She settled into the seat and watched the road through the scope. "Come on, I ain't got all day," she said. Several minutes passed. The highway was empty. Sasha kept the scope steady and her breathing even, the crosshairs floating over the vanishing point where the road met the horizon. Then movement. A shape on the horizon, followed by another, followed by a third. Vehicles. Coming fast. Sasha adjusted the scope, and the shapes resolved into 3 SUVs in a loose convoy formation, eating up the highway at speed. She clicked the walkie-talkie. "Buck, I got 3 carloads of assholes coming our way." "Do what you can to draw them all our way," Buck said. "You know I will," Sasha said. She set the walkie-talkie down and settled the rifle against her shoulder. The lead SUV was closing the distance. A quarter-mile out now, the windshield visible through the scope, the shapes of the driver and passenger becoming distinct behind the glass. She put the crosshairs on the front windshield and let out a slow breath. "You boys should have stayed home." Chapter 10. Sasha squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the round punched through the center of the lead SUV's windshield. The vehicle swerved hard to the right, tires screaming on the asphalt before the driver corrected and brought it back into the lane. Return fire came fast, muzzle flashes from the passenger side window, rounds cracking past the SUV and punching into the road surface around her. Sasha threw the SUV into gear and hit the gas. The tires caught and she launched down the highway toward the Lindsborg turnoff, the engine roaring as she put distance between herself and the convoy. Come on, take the bait," she said. She watched the rearview mirror. The lead SUV had straightened out and was accelerating. Behind it, the second and third vehicles fell into formation, all 3 of them committing to the pursuit. No one peeled off, no one hung back. They were all coming. "Hell yeah," she said. She hit the secondary road at speed, barely slowing for the turn. The SUV leaned hard on the suspension as she cut the wheel and the tires bit into the cracked asphalt. The road to Lindsborg stretched ahead of her, straight and flat, and she pushed the speedometer as high as it would go. Behind her, the convoy followed. Bullets started finding her vehicle. Rounds punched into the tailgate and the rear quarter panels with flat metallic impacts. The back window shattered, spraying safety glass across the back seat and into her hair. Cool air rushed through the cab, and the sound of the pursuing engines got louder without the glass to muffle them. She grabbed the walkie-talkie from the console. "Buck, they're on my ass. I'm going to be coming in hot," she said. "Just get to the garage. We'll be ready for you," Buck said. Sasha clipped the radio to her shirt and put both hands back on the wheel. "You damn well better be," she said. More rounds hit the vehicle. One punched through the passenger seat headrest and exited through the dashboard. Another caught the side mirror and ripped it clean off. Sasha grabbed her handgun from the seat beside her, twisted in her seat, and fired through the blown-out back window without aiming. 3 shots fast, just enough to make the lead driver flinch and back off for a second. The outskirts of Lindsborg appeared ahead, houses on both sides of the road, closed up and still. The chained zombies in the yards lunged against their posts as she tore past, the creatures snapping to attention at the sound of the engine and the gunfire. Their chains went taut, and their arms reached toward the road, but Sasha was past them before they could register what they were reaching for. In the rearview mirror, she could see the convoy entering the residential stretch behind her. The 3 SUVs bunched tighter now, closing the gap. She hit the downtown intersection and cut the wheel hard. The SUV skidded sideways across the pavement, tires howling, the back end swinging wide before catching. She came to a stop in the middle of the intersection, facing the wrong direction, the pursuing convoy visible through the dust she'd kicked up. She raised the handgun and fired 3 more rounds through the window. The shots echoed off the storefronts on both sides of the street. Then she dropped the gun into her lap, slammed the gear shift forward, and floored it. The tires spun on the pavement for a second before they caught. The SUV launched down the main drag, buildings blurring past on both sides. The mechanic's shop was ahead on the right, the bay door open and waiting. She hit the brakes hard and the SUV skidded through the opening, the front end slamming into the back wall of the shop with a crunch of metal and drywall. "Damn it," she said. She shoved the door open and got out, stumbling forward as her legs moved faster than she wanted. The bay door was still up and needed to be shut. She grabbed the handle and pulled, yanking it down on its tracks as bullets started hitting the front of the building. Rounds sparked off the metal door and punched through the drywall beside it. She got the door down and latched it, the last few inches slamming shut with a bang that echoed through the empty shop. The bullets kept coming, hammering the bay doors and the walls from outside. Sasha dropped low behind the SUV and crawled to a position between the front bumper and the wall where she had cover from every angle. The engine ticked as it cooled and fluid dripped from somewhere underneath the chassis. She checked her handgun, half a magazine left. The rifle was still in the front seat. She listened. The sound of engines outside, multiple vehicles pulling up and spreading out, doors opening, boots on pavement, orders being shouted in clipped military cadence. The soldiers were deploying around the front of the building, taking up positions to cover every exit. They moved with organization. These weren't farm guards or skeleton crew soldiers. The strike team was the real thing. Then a voice, loud and sharp, cutting through the gunfire. "You have 10 seconds to come out with your hands up, or we're going to burn you alive." Sasha moved to the small window on the side wall and peeked out, keeping her head low. The 3 SUVs were parked in a spread formation across the front of the shop, angled to provide cover. 15 soldiers were positioned behind the vehicles and along the street, rifles trained on the building. On the far right side, one of them was crouched behind an SUV with a bottle in his hand, stuffing a rag into the neck. Sasha grabbed the walkie-talkie. "Buck, whatever you're going to do, you better do it now," she said. The soldier with the Molotov stood up and flicked a lighter. The rag caught and the flame climbed, orange light reflecting off the glass of the bottle. A gunshot rang out from somewhere up the street. The round hit the soldier square in the back, catching his vest and driving him forward. The impact knocked the burning bottle out of his hands. It shattered on the pavement at his feet, and the fuel splashed across his legs and up the side of the nearest SUV. The flames spread in a rush, engulfing the soldier from the waist down and climbing the vehicle's door panel. The man screamed and stumbled away from the burning SUV, falling to the ground and rolling, but the fuel was on his clothes and the fire followed him. The soldiers' formation broke. Gunfire erupted in every direction, panicked and unfocused, rounds punching into buildings and vehicles and pavement as the men tried to figure out where the shot had come from. Muzzle flashes lit up the street in sharp bursts. Glass shattered. Brick dust exploded from the storefronts. Across the street and 2 doors down, Zayden stepped out from the entrance of a 2-story building on the opposite corner. He raised his handgun and fired several times. The shots were wild, punching into the side of an SUV and the pavement near the soldiers' feet. He didn't hit much of anything, but that wasn't the point. The point was the noise and the muzzle flash and the sudden second angle of attack that forced the soldiers to split their attention. 4 of them turned and returned fire on Zayden's position. Rounds stitched across the front of the building, blowing out the windows and chewing into the wooden door frame. Zayden pulled back inside and let the door swing mostly shut behind him, leaving it cracked. The building was a general store. Shelves lined the walls, and a long wooden counter ran along the back. The front section was clear, no zombies. Zayden moved past the shelves and dropped behind the counter, pressing his back against the wood and listening. Footsteps on the sidewalk outside, then on the wooden floor of the store. The old boards creaked under the weight of boots, announcing each man who came through the door. Zayden counted them by sound. 1 set of footsteps, 2, 3. He raised the handgun over the top of the counter without looking and pulled the trigger. 4 shots fast, sweeping the barrel across the width of the store. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Something hit the floor. Someone shouted. Zayden didn't wait to see the results. He pushed through the door behind the counter into the back room, gunfire tracking him as he moved. Rounds punched through the door frame and into the wall beside him, sending splinters across the storeroom. The storeroom was dark and cluttered with boxes and shelving units. The air was thick with the smell of rot, concentrated and close. And it wasn't empty. A zombie stood 3 feet from the door, turning toward the noise with the slow pivot of something that had been standing in the same spot for days. Zayden shoved it hard, sending it stumbling backwards, clearing just enough space for him to move. More creatures were in the storeroom, roaming between the shelving units, emerging from behind stacked boxes with the slow, clumsy movements of things that had been locked in the dark for too long. One reached for him from between 2 shelves, and he ducked under its arm. Another blocked the aisle ahead, and he shouldered past it, the creature's hands scraping across his back as he pushed through. Zayden dodged and weaved between the shelves, keeping his feet moving, knowing that stopping for even a second would let them close in around him. He reached a set of stairs at the back wall leading up to the 2nd floor. He took the stairs 2 at a time and hit the landing as the soldiers came through the door behind him. The first soldier through was unprepared. The zombie Zayden had shoved was right there, arms reaching, and it latched onto him before he could get his rifle up. The creature's weight drove the soldier to the floor, and its hands found his neck. "Help me! Help me!" the soldier screamed. The second soldier leaned down to grab his partner, trying to pull the creature off. Zayden aimed from the stairwell landing, finding his target. He fired twice. Both rounds hit the second soldier in the vest, knocking him off his feet and onto the ground beside the first man. The soldier gasped and curled onto his side, the wind driven out of him. The third soldier opened fire on the stairwell. Rounds chewed through the railing and punched into the wall above Zayden's head. He pulled back and retreated up the stairs to the 2nd floor, the gunfire following him until the angle cut it off. From below, a scream, short and sharp and full of a terror that went beyond gunfire. The zombie had bitten the first soldier. Zayden could hear it, the wet sound of teeth finding skin, and the man's screams rising to something primal before a gunshot cut them off. A single round, the third soldier putting his partner down before the bite could do its work. Then a second shot, the zombie. Zayden cracked the 2nd floor door open and looked down the stairwell. The soldier he'd hit in the vest was struggling to get up. His hands pressed against his ribs where the rounds had driven into the body armor. The third soldier grabbed him under the arm and hauled him to his feet, pulling him toward the front of the store. Behind them, the storeroom door was open, and more zombies were shambling through it, drawn by the noise and the blood. Gray shapes emerging from the darkness one after another, filling the back of the store. The 2 soldiers didn't look back. They stumbled through the front of the store and out onto the street, leaving the dead to claim the building behind them. Zayden sat on the floor of the second story and leaned his head against the wall. His hands were shaking. The handgun was warm in his grip. From outside, gunfire enveloped the town, the sounds of Buck and Meat engaging what was left of the strike force on the street below. Shots and shouts and the crash of things breaking. He closed his eyes and caught his breath. Then he checked the magazine, chambered around, and stood up. The fight wasn't over yet. Chapter 11. Buck watched from across the street as the soldier he'd shot burned on the ground. The man was rolling in the gravel, the flames climbing from his legs to his torso, his screams cutting through the gunfire that was erupting in every direction. Two soldiers broke from their positions behind the SUVs and ran to him, one of them pulling off his jacket to smother the fire, while the other grabbed the burning man's arms and tried to drag him clear. The rest of the strike team had turned outward, rifles sweeping the storefronts and the rooftops, firing at shadows and muzzle flashes and anything that moved. Buck pulled back behind the door frame of the storefront he'd set up in, a clothing store, 2 doors up from the mechanic's shop on the same side of the street. The front window was intact, and the door was propped open just enough for him to see the street. He'd taken the shot from a kneeling position inside the doorway, the rifle braced against the frame, and now he needed to disappear before they zeroed in on his position. Before he could move, gunfire erupted from across the street. Zayden, stepping out from the general store on the opposite corner, firing into the soldier's flank. "Get after them, kid," Buck said. He watched Zayden pull the attention of 4 soldiers before retreating back inside the store. 3 of them went in after him. That left the rest of the strike force on the street, and some of them were looking his way. Buck stayed behind cover, biding his time. He could hear boots on pavement, moving with purpose, getting closer. He poked his head around the doorframe just far enough to see. 4 soldiers were advancing up the street in a spread formation, their rifles aimed at his storefront. They'd figured out where the shot came from. Buck pulled back, stuck a handgun around the corner of the doorframe, and fired blind. 3 shots, fast, not aiming at anything in particular. The return fire was instant. Rounds punched through the doorframe and blew out what was left of the front window, showering the floor with glass. Buck was already moving, retreating deeper into the clothing store. The front section was clear, no zombies. Racks of clothes stood in rows down the center of the store, most of them still hung with jackets and shirts that nobody would ever buy. The light from the front window reached about halfway back before the store fell into shadow. Buck moved through the racks to the right-hand wall, where a row of dressing rooms lined the back half of the store. 5 doors, all of them closed, all of them with rope tied to the handles. The ropes ran along the wall at ankle height and gathered into a single bundle that ended in a loose knot near the last dressing room. Buck took a knee beside the wall, grabbed the rope bundle in his free hand, and went still. He kept the handgun in his right hand and listened. The soldiers came through the front door. He could hear them moving through the racks, the soft scrape of hangers being pushed aside as they cleared each row. They were being careful. Buck raised the handgun over the top of the nearest clothing rack and fired twice without getting up. The rounds went high and wide, hitting the ceiling and the far wall. He couldn't see his targets through the racks, and he wasn't trying to. He was buying time. The footsteps got closer. They were moving toward his side of the store now, drawn by the muzzle flash. 2 of them on the left, working between the racks. 2 more on the right, near the dressing rooms. Close enough. Buck yanked the rope. The dressing room doors pulled open all at once, 5 doors swinging wide on their hinges. The zombies inside came out in a rush. 2 in each room, 10 creatures stumbling into the store, arms reaching and moaning with excitement. They had been locked in the dark long enough to be hungry and disoriented, and the sound of gunfire and the movement of living bodies gave them everything they needed. The soldiers' attention snapped to the creatures. Rifles swung away from Buck's position and toward the ghouls pouring out of the dressing rooms. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing in the dim store, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. But the combination of close range and low light made headshots difficult. Rounds hit torsos and limbs and walls, dropping some of the zombies, but not enough of them fast enough. Buck rose from behind the rack and took aim at the closest soldier, a man who was backing away from 2 creatures with his rifle at his shoulder, trying to line up a shot on the nearest one's head. Buck fired once. The round caught the soldier in the side of the skull, and he dropped between the racks. Another soldier turned and fired at Buck. The rounds missed him, but hit a zombie that was between them, punching through the creature's chest without stopping it. Buck ducked low and rushed forward, grabbing the stumbling zombie by the back of its shirt and shoving it toward the soldier. The soldier opened fire, killing the creature, but Buck used the falling corpse as cover, pushing it forward as he closed the distance. The dead weight of the body gave him just enough advantage. He fired twice into the soldier's vest, the impacts driving the man off his feet and onto the floor. A rifle cracked from behind him. Pain exploded through Buck's left shoulder, hot and sharp, and he went down hard on the tile floor. His left arm went numb from the shoulder to the fingertips. He rolled onto his back and fired from the ground, one shot that caught the soldier in the foot. The man screamed and dropped to one knee, his rifle swinging toward Buck. Before he could aim, two zombies converged on him from the dressing room side, grabbing his arms and dragging him sideways. His screams changed pitch as they pulled him down. One more soldier at the front of the store. He was firing methodically, putting down zombies as fast as he could work the rifle, each shot finding a head. The creatures dropped one after another, but more kept coming from the dressing rooms, the last few stumbling over the bodies of the ones already down. The soldier cleared them with cold efficiency, then turned toward Buck's position. "You're a dead man," the soldier said. Buck crawled backward, his left arm dragging uselessly on the tile. Blood was running from his shoulder in a steady flow, soaking through his shirt and leaving a dark streak on the floor behind him. He reached the nearest dressing room and pulled himself inside, his back against the wall, the door hanging open. The soldier's boots came closer, steady, deliberate steps. Buck raised the handgun and waited, his breath coming in short, ragged pulls. The magazine was almost empty. He could feel it in the weight. The soldier appeared in the doorway. His rifle came up. Buck squeezed the trigger first. The round hit the man's vest and drove him back a step. The soldier returned fire, the rifle round passing so close to Buck's head that he felt the heat of it on his ear. The bullet buried itself in the dressing room wall behind him. Buck emptied the magazine. The rounds hit the soldier's lower body, thighs and hips, the vest not covering anything below the waist. The man's legs buckled and he went down in the doorway, the rifle clattering out of his hands. He lay on the tile floor making a sound that was more surprise than pain, his hands moving to the wounds on his legs as blood pooled around him. Buck let his head fall back against the wall. The handgun was empty and his shoulder was screaming, and the clothing store was full of bodies, human and otherwise. He sat there for a moment, breathing, the adrenaline draining out of him and leaving nothing but the pain. He pressed his right hand against the shoulder wound. The blood was coming fast, soaking through his fingers, warm and steady. He needed help. He grabbed the walkie-talkie from his belt with his bloody hand and clicked it on. "I'm in the clothing store and I'm hit," Buck said. Static. Then Sasha's voice, low and soft, barely above a whisper. "If I survive the next 5 minutes, I'll be there," she said. Sasha silenced the radio and clipped it back to her shirt. She was crouched behind the SUV inside the mechanic's shop, her handgun in her grip, listening to the sounds from outside. The street had gone quieter. The concentrated gunfire had broken into scattered shots, and the shouts had thinned out. Through the small window on the side wall, she could see 3 soldiers walking toward the shop, spread out and moving with purpose. Behind them, one of the strike team's SUVs was pulling away, turning and driving back toward the highway. Carrying the burned soldier, she guessed. 3 left coming her way. She checked the handgun. Half a magazine. The rolling bay door rattled and then went up, daylight flooding the shop floor. The 3 soldiers stepped into the opening, rifles up, silhouetted against the street behind them. Sasha opened fire from behind the SUV. Her shots forced 2 of the soldiers back outside, both of them diving for cover on either side of the bay door. The third one returned fire as he ran across the opening, his rounds punching into the SUV's body panels and shattering what was left of the windows. Outside, Meat came around the corner of the building at a dead run. He'd been waiting on the side of the shop, pressed against the brick wall, listening for the right moment. The 2 soldiers who'd been driven back outside were crouched on either side of the bay door, focused on the interior, their rifles aimed into the shop. They didn't see him coming. Meat threw the pipe wrench. It tumbled end over end across the 15 feet between them and caught the soldier on the far side of the bay door, square in the face. The man dropped like his strings had been cut, his rifle clattering on the pavement. The other soldier spun toward the sound, trying to bring his rifle around, but meat was already on him. He ducked under the barrel, got both hands on the man's vest, lifted him off his feet, and drove him headfirst into the pavement. The impact was final. The soldier didn't move. Meat reached down and picked up the pipe wrench from beside the first soldier, who was lying on his back with his hands over his face, stunned and bleeding. Meat brought the wrench down 3 times, fast and brutal, and the man went still. The sound of a rifle bolt being racked stopped him cold. Meat looked up. The third soldier, the one who'd fired from inside the bay door, was standing 10 yards away with his rifle shouldered and the barrel pointed at Meat's chest. The man's eyes were steady. His finger was on the trigger. A gunshot cracked from inside the shop. Sasha firing from beside the SUV. The round missed the soldier, but it was close enough to make him flinch. He turned and fired toward the shop, and in that half second of divided attention, Meat was moving. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and brought the wrench down with everything he had. The soldier went to the ground and didn't get up. Meat stood there breathing hard, the wrench hanging from his hand, his chest heaving. Then he looked toward the shop. "Sasha," he called. He ran through the bay door and found her on the ground beside the SUV. She was on her back, her hands pressed against her stomach. Blood was spreading between her fingers, dark and fast, soaking through her shirt and pooling on the concrete beneath her. The soldier's last burst had found her. Meat dropped to his knees beside her and put his hands over hers, pressing down on the wound. The blood came through his fingers the same way it was coming through hers. Too much. Too fast. "You're going to be okay, you're going to be okay," Meat said. She tried to speak. Her mouth moved and her eyes found his face, but no sound came out. The strength that should have been behind the words wasn't there. Her hands loosened under his, and her breathing changed, going shallow and uneven, each breath shorter than the last. Meat pulled the radio from her shirt with one bloody hand, clicking it on. "Sasha's hit! We have to get out of here now!" he yelled. He put the radio down and pressed both hands back on the wound, leaning his weight into it, willing it to be enough. Her eyes stayed on his face for another few seconds. He could see the focus in them fading, the sharpness going soft, the light that made her who she was dimming behind her pupils. Then it was gone. Her eyes stayed open, but the life behind them left. Her body went limp under his hands, and the blood stopped pulsing between his fingers, and she was still. Meat stayed on his knees beside her. His hands were still on the wound. His arms were shaking, the tremor running from his shoulders to his fingertips, and he couldn't make it stop. They had won, but the price was too high. The end.